The small diner sat on the corner of Main Street, glowing with the golden hue of the morning sun. Its windows rattled each time a truck rolled past, and the scent of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee drifted into the air. Inside, the chatter of locals filled the space, farmers discussing the weather, mechanics talking about last night's football game, and businesspeople grabbing their usual breakfast before work. At the far end of the counter sat a man who didn't quite fit in. He wore faded jeans, a worn hoodie, and shoes that had seen better days. His hair was messy, and his hands bore a few calluses that suggested he wasn't afraid of work. To everyone around, he looked like another down on his luck drifter. But beneath the humble disguise sat James Howard, CEO of Howard Enterprises, a man worth millions. James wasn't here for luxury. He had made a habit of traveling to towns like this in plain clothes, eating in diners where nobody knew his face, just to remind himself of what real life looked like. He had grown weary of boardrooms, polished speeches, and people who only cared for his money. Today, he wanted to observe people as they truly were. He had ordered something simple: scrambled eggs, toast, and black coffee. The plate was nearly empty now, and he leaned back slightly, enjoying the chatter and clatter of the diner. For a brief moment, he felt almost normal, like any other man starting his day. When the waitress, a young woman with tired eyes and a tight ponytail, slid the check toward him, James reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't think twice as he placed his platinum credit card on the counter. It was the same card that could pay for a private jet in an instant, the card he had used countless times without issue. The waitress smiled politely, picked it up, and walked toward the register. James took a sip of his coffee, expecting the familiar sound of the receipt printing. But instead, a pause stretched in the air. The waitress frowned at the screen, swiped the card again, and then once more. Her brow furrowed deeper with each attempt. She walked back to the counter, her voice low but clear enough for nearby customers to hear. "I'm sorry, sir, but your card has been declined." The words seemed to echo louder than they should have. James blinked in surprise, certain he had misheard. "Declined," he repeated softly. "Yes." The waitress shifted uncomfortably. "I tried it 3 times. It won't go through." At the next booth over, 2 men in pressed suits paused mid-bite, exchanging knowing glances. One of them smirked. "Figures," he whispered just loud enough for others to catch. "Look at him. Guy looks like he can barely afford socks. Probably tried to scam a free meal." A few chuckles followed. Another customer muttered under his breath, "People shouldn't eat if they can't pay." Heat rose to James's cheeks. He instinctively reached for his wallet again, flipping it open, but he already knew what he'd find: nothing but a driver's license and a few receipts. His cash was sitting in the glove compartment of his car outside. Normally, he carried at least some bills, but this morning he had left in a hurry, wanting only the comfort of a quiet breakfast. The waitress crossed her arms. She wasn't unkind, but there was strain in her voice. "Sir, I'm going to need some form of payment. Cash, another card, anything." James swallowed. I must have left my cash in my car. If you give me just a minute, I can." But before he could finish, the man in the suit interrupted, loud enough for the entire diner. "Yeah right. That's what they all say. Probably a deadbeat trying to get out of a $10 meal." A ripple of laughter spread through a few tables. Some people turned their heads away, pretending not to stare, but their judgmental looks cut deeper than words. James felt every eye on him. He had never experienced this before. In his world, people bent over backwards to serve him. Restaurant owners rushed to comp his meals, store managers opened registers just for him, and no one had ever dared to embarrass him in public. Now, stripped of his wealth and reputation, he was just another man being silently ridiculed. The waitress leaned forward slightly. "Sir, I'll need to resolve this quickly. We have other customers waiting." James's voice grew quieter. "I understand. I'll get the money from my car." He stood slowly, aware of the snickers around him. "Don't let him walk out." One man called sarcastically. "You'll never see him again." That drew a few more laughs. James froze in place, feeling a weight he had never known before: humiliation. He wanted to shout that he could buy the entire diner, pay everyone's bills for a year, or that his card must have been frozen by the bank by mistake. But he didn't. That wasn't the point of this journey. He had chosen to blend in, to see how people treated someone they thought was poor. And now he was learning the lesson in full. The waitress sighed. "Sir, please, just wait here while I talk to the manager." She turned toward the back, leaving James standing awkwardly at the counter. The whispers grew louder. What kind of man doesn't carry cash? Probably spends it all on booze. Should have known when he walked in wearing that hoodie. James sat back down, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his empty coffee cup. For the first time in years, he felt powerless, not because he lacked money, but because in this moment, no one believed he had any. The diner, once warm and welcoming, suddenly felt like a stage where he was the fool. Every laugh, every sideways glance cut at him. The air was thick with judgment. And all he could do was sit there, waiting, exposed in a way he had never been before. The diner had fallen into that awkward hush that happens when everyone is pretending not to watch, but they were watching. James sat at the counter, his wallet useless in his hands, his pride shrinking smaller with each passing second. The waitress had disappeared into the back to fetch the manager, and the businessmen in suits at the corner table chuckled as though the morning had delivered them free entertainment. The humiliation pressed down like a heavy coat. James Howard, the man who had signed billion-dollar deals, who owned office towers and factories, now sat helpless, treated like a broke drifter who couldn't pay for a plate of eggs. Just then, the faint squeak of rubber soles against linoleum broke the silence. From the far corner of the diner, where few bothered to notice him, a janitor straightened his back from the floor he'd been mopping. He was in his late 50s, his shoulders slightly stooped, his uniform faded from years of washing. His face carried deep lines not just of age but of long days and harder nights. He looked at James, then at the register, and without hesitation, walked over. "Don't worry, son," the janitor said, his voice rough but steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded wad of small bills, ones and fives mostly, crumpled and worn. Carefully, he smoothed them out on the counter and slid them toward the waitress's station. "I got this." The diner froze. Forks stopped midway to mouths. The two businessmen snorted, one whispering, "Of course, the janitor's playing hero." The waitress returned just as the bills hit the counter. She blinked. "Mr. Carter, you don't have to." "I said I got it," the janitor, Mr. Carter, repeated firmly. "Everyone deserves a warm meal. Nobody should be shamed for a mistake." James's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He had been surrounded by wealth his entire life, yet never had generosity hit him with such force. This man, who probably earned in a month what James might spend on a single tie, was willing to cover for him, without question, without hesitation, without judgment. The businessmen at the booth scoffed. "What a waste," one muttered. But a young mother at a nearby table lowered her eyes, ashamed. Another customer shifted uncomfortably, as though seeing themselves in the mirror of judgment they had cast. James finally found his voice. "Sir, I can't let you do this. You don't know me. I'll get the money from my car. I promise." The janitor smiled faintly, revealing a missing tooth at the side. "Doesn't matter if I know you. What matters is, you were hungry, you ate, and now you're in a tight spot. That's enough for me. Life's hard enough without people tearing each other down." His words weren't spoken for applause, but they carried through the diner like a sermon. Even the waitress paused, her eyes softening as she picked up the bills. "I'll ring this up, then," she said quietly. James lowered his head, overcome. He had been in boardrooms with powerful men who pledged donations in the millions, but never had he felt the raw power of compassion like this. The janitor gave a small nod, turned back, and picked up his mop again, as though what he had done was no more extraordinary than sweeping crumbs from the floor. Later that week, the diner buzzed with unusual energy. Rumors had spread, about the stranger whose card had been declined, about the janitor who had stepped in, about the quiet dignity that had silenced a room full of judgment. That morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A chauffeur in a suit opened the door, and out stepped a man in a tailored navy jacket, polished shoes, and a commanding presence. The same man who had worn the faded hoodie just days before. James walked into the diner, and the air shifted instantly. The businessmen who had laughed at him stiffened, their faces draining of color. The waitress blinked in shock, almost dropping her tray. He scanned the room, not with arrogance, but with purpose, until his eyes landed on the janitor, who was once again bent over his mop bucket, shoulders heavy with work. Mr. Carter, James said, his voice warm but firm. The janitor straightened slowly, clearly puzzled. Yes, sir. James extended his hand. I owe you more than I can ever repay. The diner watched in stunned silence as James pulled out a checkbook and signed a slip right there on the counter. But he didn't hand it over. Instead, he looked Carter in the eye. Last week, you showed me something no amount of money could buy. Compassion, humanity, dignity. That's why I'm here, not to pay you back for a meal, but to invite you to work with me. Starting today, you won't be mopping floors anymore. You'll be managing the new logistics facility my company is opening in this state. A steady salary, benefits, a fresh start. Gasps filled the diner. The businessmen who had laughed the loudest now looked as though the floor had dropped out from beneath them. The waitress covered her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. The janitor's hands trembled as he tried to form words. Sir, I don't understand. I'm just a janitor. James smiled. No, Mr. Carter. You're a man with a heart bigger than this entire room. And that's exactly the kind of leader I want in my company. Tears welled in Carter's eyes. His lips quivered, but at last, he clasped James's hand, gripping it tightly with the strength of someone who had worked hard his whole life without expecting anything in return. The diner erupted into applause. Some clapped out of genuine admiration, others to drown out their own shame. The businessmen who had mocked hung their heads, avoiding James's gaze. James turned to the crowd. Remember this, he said firmly. Wealth doesn't define a man. How he treats others when they have nothing to offer, that's the real measure. And with that, the millionaire and the janitor walked out together, side by side, not as a benefactor and a charity case, but as two men bound by respect. Moral. True kindness is never wasted. A single act of compassion can transform not only another person's life but also reveal the deepest wealth within ourselves.